So it worked out good. We've been learning this Gemara about putting the whole loaf of bread together with the broken piece of bread, and somehow fulfilling both views, which we spoke about yesterday. That there's a difference between the way Rashi learns this and Tosfos learns this. Either both views refers to Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan. The way Rashi learned that the large, if you have a case of a large broken loaf, and you have a small complete loaf, so in this scenario, it would be an argument between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan what you should do, because Rav Huna held that the larger piece wins, and Rabbi Yochanan held that the whole loaf wins when it comes to bracha. So we would have an argument in this scenario, because on the one hand, one loaf is larger, on the other hand, the other loaf is whole. So in that case, it was an argument. So of course we follow Rabbi Yochanan, which means the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan, which means that the whole, the sholem, the complete one, really overrides. It wins the largeness. But nevertheless, if you want to fulfill both views, you could put them both together and recite the Hamoitzi over both, and put the smaller piece, the broken one under the complete one. And it's as if you broke bread from both. And Rashi says you really only need to cut the whole one, but it's considered that you recited the bracha also on the large broken one. Now Tosfos learned that he couldn't learn this way, because Tosfos learned that the broken, that the argument between Rav Huna and Rabbi Yochanan was that Rav Huna holds that you could do either or, meaning that the argument of Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Huna was in a case where the broken loaf is larger than the whole loaf. Rav Huna says you have either option. On the one hand, largeness is something important. On the other hand, completeness is something important. So I mentioned yesterday, it's basically quality and quantity, because the complete one is more like quality, and the large broken loaf is quantity. So Rav Huna says either or. You could either, whichever one you want, you recite the bracha on, because the complete one is complete, and the broken one is whole, is large. So you have so you have both options there. So Rav Huna holds you have both options. Rabbi Yochanan says no, we don't care about the largeness. It's all about the sholem, the completeness. That's the most important thing. Now, according to this way of learning, which is Tosfos' way of learning, what would you do in a case where you have a very large piece that's broken and you have a small roll? What would you do if you want to fulfill both views? So according to Tosfos, all you need to do is recite the bracha on the whole, on the sholem, because according to Tosfos, Rav Huna says you could do either or, and Rabbi Yochanan says you need to use the sholem, the complete one. So you'll fulfill both views if you just do the complete one. And therefore, when the Gemara says that if you want to fulfill both views, this can't be the scenario what the Gemara is talking about, because the Gemara says you need to do both. Put the broken piece under the whole one. This can't be the case, because according to both views, you don't need to do that. You could just use a whole one, according to Tosfos. So we explained that the way Tosfos learns is talking about a case of wheat and barley. That the broken one is wheat and the whole one is barley. That's the case that Tosfos is learning. That you want to fulfill both, you got to put you want to have, on the one hand, the halacha is that you really only need the wheat, because wheat comes before barley in the verse of the 7 species. So really wheat takes precedence. But on the other hand, the barley one is a complete loaf. It has a certain significance and certain importance that it's whole. So if you want to fulfill both of these ideas, that on the one hand you want to do wheat, and on the other hand you want to have the wholeness of the barley, so you put them together, and you then would fulfill both of these important elements, which is wholeness and the wheat, and giving and recital on the wheat. Now the Gemara continued, and it mentioned that a Yorei Shamayim does this. He puts the prusa b'soich hashlema, the broken one, under the complete one of Vaitzea, and he cuts. Now, and then the Gemara said that a Tana learned this in front of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok. He says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Shalman or Salman." So he says, your name is tells exactly who you are, because you've placed peace between the students, and your teaching brings peace, and it's all about peace. Now the truth is, this seems to fit more with Rashi's pshat, because he's saying you've brought peace between the students, implying like we're dealing with Rav Huna and Rav Yechanan, instead of just dealing with ideas of shalem versus wheat. But Taisus would have to answer and somehow fit in that, a little, he'd have to push his explanation to fit that. I think there was a commentary that explained it. Let me just see. The way he explains it, he have to explain it that the Gemara wanted to connect this with an argument of Tanoim. So he has to explain it that it's going on those Tanoim, that the case of the onion, which we learned that the onion, there was an argument if you should better to have a large onion. Is it better to have a half of a large onion or a whole onion, but it's smaller? No, it's not a large onion. It's the same. It's either smaller than the large piece, according to Rashi, or the other explanation is it's the same size, but it tastes better. That's actually the way Tosfos learned. I didn't really go through that with everyone, but that was another explanation in that case. So that was an argument between the rabbis of should you use the complete one or should you use the better tasting one, because the large onion tastes better than a small onion. I don't know the practicality of that in today's onions, if people feel the same way, but that's the way Tosfos mentions that the large onions, a half of a large onion actually tastes better than a small onion. Maybe a small onion is not as tasty, I don't know. But that's the way Tosfos explains the Gemara. And ultimately, he says that would be how he fits his explanation in the continuation of the Gemara, that he's making peace between those two rabbis because both of those rabbis were basically discussing this similar type of scenario, where you have either the option of a complete onion, or you have the option of a better tasting onion. And the same thing you have with wheat and barley, because wheat on the one hand is preferable because the pasuk puts wheat before barley. On the other hand, the shalem also has a preference, and so therefore, just like the rabbis argued over there, the rabbis the Gemara wanted to say that those rabbis would argue in the case of wheat and barley as well. And although the Gemara said that it's not a proof, but it does. But the conclusion of the Gemara, it wasn't saying that they can't be the argument. It's saying that it's not necessarily the same argument, and that's how Tosfos would learn our Gemara, that you've made peace between the students means between those two views regarding truma and regarding the onion, and that's how you would explain the Gemara to fit. Okay, so we basically concluded that Yorish Ramayim.
On the onion, I wanted to say the small onion has the same nutrients as if it grew into a big onion. So it doesn't add any nutrients or vitamins being big.
Okay.
So the small onion would have more nutrients than half a big onion and more vitamins than half a big onion.
But we're dealing with taste.
More hazanah, more mazon, or whatever you call it.
Right. No, Tosfos implies that he's talking about flavor. So I don't know if he means that one is sweeter than the other, or one is more strong.
Maybe it's less concentrated because the small one has everything that the big one is going to have. Just the big one will have more water.
So maybe maybe a small one is too strong and the big one is tastier because it's not as strong. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever it is, there is reason to use a half of a big onion because it's tastier. That's all that I can tell you from the Tosfos. From practical, I'm not really I'm not so big into onions, so I don't know. But from the Tosfos, that's how he explains the Gemara, and he explains the connection, and that's how he would continue learning the continuation of the Gemara that we explained yesterday. According to Tosfos, that would be how he continues explaining the Gemara, that you place peace between the students. Now,
Rabbi, could I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Would these rabbis argue in front of the students? Can you?
What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know.
Do you think that's surprising if they argued in front of the students?
For me, it would be a little surprising. I'm not.
Well, if they punched each other in the nose.
No, I don't mean.
But if they're just having a discussion, I don't know if that's.
No, but you know how sometimes the difference of opinion. I'm not saying it escalates. I'm just saying that, it might confuse the students. I don't know.
My understanding is that they definitely did have arguments sometimes between, amongst in front of their students, and it's very, it's apropos.
Yeah,
it's part of the learning experience.
Yeah,
listening to opposite interpretations. That's what you do in yeshiva. You read and then you discuss it.
I see.
Yes, Ben.
Ask a follow-up. There is 120 Chachamim or 121 Chachamim in the Sanhedrin.
No. 71.
71, I'm sorry. But in the Talmud, it's always one or two or five of them. That's it. That are talking about anything.
Right.
All the other 60-something are not mentioned. What's the story? The others are just sleeping or what?
They're out on a coffee break.
So the Sanhedrin was the Sanhedrin was ended, I think it says 40 years before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. They didn't have a Sanhedrin, but they did have yeshiva.
Hundreds of years later.
They did have yeshivas, and they did have discussions, but it wasn't in a Sanhedrin style.
But even so, they probably had a lot more yeshivas than they're mentioning here. They only mention probably the important ones or something. I don't know.
Well, you have to understand that there's not a lot of cases, you don't have 71 different options. It's either kosher or not kosher. It's either permissible or prohibited. So they had the views already stated, and some rabbis probably followed one view and other rabbis followed the other, but these were the main initiators.
But they don't
of the view.
participate, the others don't participate.
Why should they? I mean, the initiate, it was probably a lot of these discussions. First of all, not necessarily were they all sitting together. You didn't have necessarily all the rabbis. This rabbi was in a yeshiva in Pumbedisa. The other one was in a yeshiva in Neherdah. They did get together every so often, I'm sure.
He was in Neherdah 50 years later even. It's not over one argument. This is over a period of years.
Oh, now it makes more sense. Okay. Okay, now I get it. Okay.
So,
And we
Very
also
good.
understand that over the years, different rabbis had the same names. So ostensibly, it was an open discussion, and those who got to record it were able to record it for posterity. That's my interpretation.
you said that they had the same names? What
Well,
do you mean by
we
that?
talked about, like you said, Rabbi Yehuda, but it
Uh-huh.
wasn't necessarily one Rabbi Yehuda in history as part of the discussion. There were other Rabbi Yehudas, as you had exemplified in, again, using other names, that again, it was a rabbi who was part of the discussion. If it was done over the generations, it obviously wasn't the same Rabbi Yehuda. It was just, again, a Rabbi Yehuda who at that time in history, was part of the dialogue.
Right,
I
but
mean,
not
Other
always.
names as well. Yeah, not
Yeah,
always, but
not
you
always
don't
do
know.
you have similar names agreeing. Just
Yeah, no,
because their
right.
name was Yehuda didn't mean that they agreed with the same view that the earlier Rabbi Yehuda said.
Yeah, no, I
But,
understand.
so I don't know if that's necessarily so, but I mean, it could have happened that you could have, a few Rabbi Yehudas agreeing. But in any event, these are the debates that the rabbis had, and sometimes they had it in front of each other. Sometimes it might have been just one rabbi said his view, and the students or someone traveled from one place to the other and found out the other rabbi says the other one. And ultimately, in the Talmud, it's mentioned. It does not necessarily did they debate in front to each other either, but there must have been times that they did and times that they didn't. But I don't see any issue with them debating in front of their students. Okay, so the Gemara continued and says that that everyone agrees on Pesach that you place the matzah, the broken one, into the shlema, in the complete one, ubaitseya, in that you would then cut the matzah. And the reason is, in this case, why would you want to hold a broken matzah when on Shabbos and Yantiv you always have complete matzahs, complete challah and regular Shabbos and Yantiv, and on Pesach you would have complete matzahs. So what are you doing, putting a broken piece in a complete, under a complete matzah? And the answer is because it says lechem oini. Lechem oini ksiv, it says lechem oini. And because it says the bread of poverty, that requires there to be a broken matzah. So what we're really learning here is, what is the reason why we have 3 matzahs at the Seder? I'm not talking Kabbalistically, I'm talking practically. Why practically do you have 3 matzahs at the Seder? And the answer is that you have 2 matzahs for Lechem Mishnah. The outer 2 matzahs are the Lechem Mishnah. Every holiday and Shabbos needs to have 2 loaves of bread, 2 challahs. And if you don't have challah during the year, you could also use matzah. On Pesach, you have to use matzah, but you need 2 Lechem Mishnah. And that's because the manna fell double on Friday. And so we connect Shabbos to this double portion. And therefore, we have a double challah at every meal on Shabbos. Now, on Pesach, you also want to have a lechem mishnah, at least according to our custom. We want to even Pesach night, but at the same time, we also want to have a broken matzah because lechem oini, bread of poverty. So how do you get bread of poverty? How do you have a broken, the poor people, they get pieces of bread from the wealthier people. They get the leftovers. So they don't have full loaves. The poor people get he has a leftover half a loaf. This one has a quarter of a loaf. The poor people get broken pieces. They don't have a whole loaf. So how do we eat the matzah on Pesach in a way of a poor person? We have a half a matzah. How do we have a half a matzah? So in the beginning of the Seder, we break the matzah in half, and the smaller half stays under the other matzahs, and it stays in between, the other two matzahs in between. And in this way, when we recite the blessing, the bracha on the matzahs, two brachas, so ultimately they're said on the broken matzah as well. The broken matzah is there, so you have your lechem mishnah, and you also have your broken matzah, and you're all set. Now, I think most of us have a tradition, if I'm not mistaken, that you hold all three matzahs for the first bracha, hamoitzi lechem in haaretz. Then you put down the bottom matzah, and then you have a whole matzah and a broken matzah, and you recite the bracha al achilas matzah on those two. And then you break off from both, and you eat from both. And the proper way to do it, it's not so easy, but the proper way to do it is to even eat a kazayas, an olive size, from the broken one, and an olive size from the complete one. And you got to really chew it a lot and fast within a certain time frame and try to swallow them together. But if it's possible, you try as much as you can. But if you don't have the ability to have both, like for example, you're a guest at the Seder, then you just have an olive size of matzah, and the person who recited the blessing, he has in mind everyone for the blessing on the broken matzah and on the lechem mishnah, and then you take a piece and you're fulfilling your mitzvah with your one olive size matzah within a few minutes. You got to finish it within a few minutes so that it's considered one eating of an olive size of matzah. Different opinions of how big the matzah has to be. The round matzahs, some say even like a quarter of it is considered an olive size, maybe a third. Some want to be strict, maybe a half. But there are different opinions of the size, and of course, everyone can follow their view, their rabbi's view. But so the discussion here is on Pesach that you do a similar thing. You have this broken matzah under the complete matzah. Now, I will tell you something that's interesting, that our Gemara doesn't clarify that you need three matzahs. Our Gemara seems like you only need two matzahs, and even the second matzah, it's good enough if it's broken. And this is the view of some of the commentaries, some of the Rishonim, or at least it's discussed in the Rishonim, that it's possible that, let me mute everyone. Okay, so it's possible that the Pesach night, possible you don't really need lechem mishnah, because when the rabbis established the rule that they understood from the Torah that when the rabbis understood from the Torah, you need lechem oini, you need poor man's bread. That establishment of poor man's bread sort of overrides and says that on this night you don't need to have lechem mishnah. You don't need to have a double full matzahs, and it's good enough to have one full matzah and one broken one. And with that, I shouldn't say you override it. Maybe that's a fulfillment of the lechem mishnah, the double, that the second one could be broken on Pesach night because it's supposed to be poor man's bread. So this is a discussion, but obviously we don't follow that. But it is somewhat hinted to in our Gemara that such an idea that it doesn't say prusa b'soich shleimois, a prusa, broken one, be in between the two complete ones. It says prusa b'soich shleima, similar to the previous Gemara, that you put a piece under the whole one, and it uses the word tzoich, but the previous Gemara also used that word, and it meant under. So here also it could mean under, and maybe this is I don't know if there is, but I'm told that the followers of the Vilna Gaon have a different style Seder, and it could be, maybe, I have to look into this, if they maybe follow this and they don't have three matzahs. I have to check this up. I don't know for sure, but I'm told that they have that they do things a lot very differently than the common accepted way, and possibly they follow this if that's true. Robert.
Just curious if you can comment about the importance of identifying the poor and then creating the ritual in recognition of the poor. Is there again a value? Is there saying that it's the people, the less people who, whatever it is? I'm just sort of curious what was the basis for recognizing the poor, and then that becomes part of the tradition over the generations?
Well, it's based on a verse, and it says in Devarim, I have to pull it up, but there is a verse in Devarim, maybe on the side of some Gemaras. One second, let's see if it's here. Here it is. Loi Seichel, I forgot that I have the new style Gemara. They put the whole verse on the side. So here it is. Don't eat on it chametz. 7 days you should eat on it matzah, lechem oini, poverty bread, because you left Egypt in haste, in order that you remember the day that you left Egypt all the days of your life. So this is a verse in Deuteronomy and in chapter 16, verse 3. We could look it up also. It says they are clearly lechem oini, this bread of poverty. So it's causing us to remember our years of suffering in Egypt. And,
all right, so it's a different definition of what being poor was that, we essentially were refugees. I mean, we were in the desert, and therefore we didn't have everything we would like to have.
Well, not exactly. The desert, we wouldn't be considered poor people in the desert. In Egypt, we were poor. When we were in the desert, we're actually very rich. We actually had gold, silver, copper. We had 70. Each Jew had 70 camels, donkeys laden with all different precious gems and stuff from Egypt that we took from the booty we borrowed from Egypt, and we took from the booty at the sea when all the Egyptians died, and we got all of their belongings and precious belongings. So so we were wealthy in the desert, but when we were in Egypt, that's when we were poor, and that's by eating bread of poverty. We recall, we feel, we try to imagine that feeling of being in Egypt as slaves. Yes, Ben.
I have a practical question. If you buy a box of matzah for Pesach, 3 matzahs in a box, you open the box on the Seder, and 2 of them are broken.
Uh-huh.
You have only one hole.
this is a big problem that we deal with every year. The fact that you pay top dollar for these matzahs, and you're paying for whole matzahs,
Right.
and they give you, and this is not only because of shipping, because even even when you walk out of the bakery, you have
Right.
your box with you, and some of them are broken, and they're charging you for whole matzahs. That's one thing about the price. Now about the money aspect. Now the issue is what do you do for the Seder? Because you want to have three. You want to start with 3 full matzahs, and so the simple thing is that you have to save up money a whole year to buy extra
Two
matzah,
boxes.
buy a few extra boxes, and this way you definitely have enough. That's really what that's the simple way out. It's expensive, but that's the way
Yeah, but
to
lechem
deal with
oni
it.
is not going to be more than 1 box.
No. You still need for the rest, the whole Pesach, you need to have shleimos. You need complete matzahs, the Pesach. You need, first of all, you start with 3 complete ones for the Seder. And in the middle of the Seder, you break it and you make it broken. You make it lechem oni. Don't start with lechem. You shouldn't start with lechem oni.
Yeah, but the poor are not going to buy more than 1 box.
We're not telling you to buy like a poor man. We're telling you to have on this
I'm
at
talking
the
about the
Seder.
poor man. I'm not talking about me.
I understand. I'm saying the mitzvah of lechem oini is not saying you should buy matzah as a poor man buys matzah. It's saying that you should have matzah at your Seder like a poor man has it. But you buying it, you should buy whole ones. Buy it like a rich man. And at the Seder, you have matzah and you recite a bracha on it as a poor man does. That's how you recite the bracha. So initially, you should start with whole ones. And also, you need to have matzah the next day, 2 matzahs. And you need the next night, the next Seder, another 3 matzahs for the second Seder. And then the next day, 2 matzahs. And then the end of Pesach, you need, 2 matzahs. You need a lot of whole matzahs. So, and then if there's a Shabbos Chol Hamoed, this year I don't think we have a Shabbos Chol Hamoed, but normal Pesachs, you have a Shabbos in the middle. You also need another, few complete matzahs for Shabbos. So
the poor man should be invited into somebody that has the matzahs.
so the poor man should make sure to stand online for the when they give out the matzah, and make sure to get a nice amount, and in addition to that, get invited out, and hopefully they'll be fine,
Okay.
So the Gemara here tells us that you for Pesach you have this whole matzah and this broken matzah, and you the reason for it is lechem oini, because of poor man's bread. Now, what is the main matzah for of these that you're going to break bread on? You're going to break matzah on. Is it the broken one or the whole one? So we know that on Yontiv you're supposed to use a whole one for lechem mishnah. Now, in addition to that, you want to have the broken one. So there's a whole discussion exactly how to do this. Of course, we know our tradition, our minhag, but the bottom Taisus over here are a little complicated. He goes through different ways of. He has another issue as well. He deals with another issue, and that is something that we're going to see a little later, having to do with, can you fulfill 2 mitzvahs with 1 item? It's sort of like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, that you don't want to cheapen the mitzvah and say we want to. So the question really is, there are 2 brachas that you're reciting the matzah on. You're reciting the matzah, the bracha on matzah. There are 2 brachas. You're doing a hamaitzi lechem in aretz, and you're reciting a bracha ala chilas matzah. So the question is, how should you work those brachas? Is 1 bracha on 1 matzah, in the other bracha on the other matzah? Or can you do both brachas on the same matzah? So this bottom Tosfos over here deals with this. He says that it seems that he says you shouldn't you shouldn't only break the prusa, the broken one. Rather, or break both in the beginning. First, you break the complete one, and then recite the al achilas matzah bracha, the second bracha, and you eat them together. So you break off the first, after the first bracha, you break off from the whole one, and after the second bracha, you break off from the broken one, and then you eat them together, and in this way, it'll be visible that the appearance will be that you made the bracha on the broken one as well. And he says, however, don't recite the hamaitzi bracha and the al achilas matzah bracha on the broken one, because then you're doing two mitzvahs on one matzah. So it's called you einois in mitzvahs chavilos. You don't want to make a mitzvahs into like a burden and bundle them up. And so this is how Tosfos starts. But then Tosfos argues, and then he says, it really seems to me it's not a problem, because what about Kiddush? Think about this. Kiddush, you have 1 cup of wine, and you recite Kiddush on the cup of wine, and you also recite a Bar Priya Gafen on the 1 cup of wine. So you're reciting 2 things, 2 brachas on 1 cup of wine, and it would seem that it's obviously not a problem, because Kiddush we do, and obviously it's not an issue. And the reason is because the Kiddush is on it's a Birchas Hanenin. The bracha Bar Priya Gafen is on the wine, drinking the wine, and the Kiddush is the bracha for the mitzvah. So it's not really like killing 2 birds with 1 stone and trying to get away easy. And this is not really a problem. So Tosfos tries to argue with that idea that it's not an issue, and he says.
I have one more question, Rabbi.
Just one second. But then he brings a Rabbeinu Menachem from Vienna, and at least one way of reading it. Another way of reading it is from Uni. Uni is probably some city in France, but he has this Rabbeinu Menachem. He says that the way he did it was he would only recite everything on the prusa, the broken one. The whole one was only there for the bracha, but he didn't eat from it, which is very interesting. That according to him, you could fulfill the lechem mishnah, the having a complete one, but without eating even from the actual complete one. And he didn't have a problem with that. In other words, he only ate from the prusa, the broken one, and that was good enough. And obviously he had no issue of the killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, then he brings the Ri. The Ri, initially what he used to do was he would recite the bracha hamoitzi, the first bracha, on both. Then he would recite the next bracha al achilas matzah. He didn't break anything off. And only after he recited both brachas, then he would break from both. And if you do that, you don't have a problem. Since he's doing it on both, it's not like killing 2 birds with 1 stone, because he's got 2 matzahs there. but he didn't break off initially from the first one and only then afterwards do the second one. Then there were times that the Reed did differently. He didn't want to get involved in doing things differently and like an argument. So he used to follow the regular minhag. He would recite the bracha on the complete one first, the hamoitzi. He would break a little off, but he wouldn't take it complete, separate it. He would keep it attached, but he made a little break in it until he recited the bracha on the broken one, and then he would break off from both and eat from both of the matzahs. So ultimately, we see there were different minhagim, how they actually, different rabbis did it differently, how they actually fulfilled the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach night. Now we had two questions over here, and Yehuda has his hand up first, I think. So Yehuda.
I don't understand how like with the Kiddush, first of all. So if you're making two brachas on that, isn't that elevating the wine?
Somehow there's a thought that the Kiddush, by reciting two brachas on it, it would seemingly be using one item and reciting two brachas on it. And for the Tosfos uses that as a proof that it's obviously not a problem. So you're correct. There's definitely not a problem with it because we do it. The question is why. So the simple answer that Tosfos gives is that one of the brachas is on the mitzvah of Kiddush, and the other bracha is called the Berchas Hanenin, just the bracha for the wine. So you're not really reciting two mitzvahs, doing two mitzvahs with one cup of wine. You're really doing one mitzvah with one cup of wine, and the other bracha is just to be able to drink it, you need to recite a bracha on it. So you're really doing one mitzvah with one cup of wine. You're not using one cup of wine for two mitzvahs. But the first view that says that you have to be careful, and on Pesach night, when you recite the Hamoitzi Lechem in Ha'aretz and you recite the Alachilas Matzah, Pesach night, you do have to be careful. What would he answer? How would that view explain Kiddush? Kiddush, everyone knows you only use one cup of wine. Why is that rabbi more concerned about Pesach night than Kiddush? Why is Kiddush not an issue for that rabbi? That rabbi felt that you can't do this on a Pesach night. You can't use both two brachas on one matzah. Why can you do that on one cup of wine? So that rabbi would have to learn a little differently, and he would have to explain that Kiddush, the bracha on the wine, is allowed. The reason why it's allowed there is because the bracha on the wine is sanctifying the Kiddush wine, and the bracha on that you recite afterwards is really about the day. It's not on the wine. You happen to reciting it with the wine in your hand, but it's not really a bracha using the wine. And the emphasis of that bracha is really on the day of Shabbos. And that's why for Kiddush, it's not a problem. But for Pesach night, you're fulfilling two mitzvahs. And you can't fulfill two mitzvahs with one matzah. So the two mitzvahs that you're fulfilling is the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah and the mitzvah of eating matzah. So you can't fulfill both with the same matzah. Therefore, you have two separate matzahs. You have the one top one, and you have the middle one. And one matzah is more for the Lechem Mishnah and the Su'uda, and the other one is for the Lechem Oini, it's for the bread of poverty. And that's how he holds that you need to have separate. You would need one bracha for this one and one bracha for the other one. That's how he held. Rabbeinu Menachem seemed to argue. He said it's not a problem. But the first view of Tosfos was that that's an issue. You're fulfilling two mitzvahs with one matzah would be an issue. Again, we don't really deal with this much because we have three matzahs, and we're once you're holding both of them and you're going to be breaking both, it's not an issue. But I guess you have to understand, maybe in those days it was also challenging. It was very expensive matzah, and they probably had very little. I don't know, maybe. And if so, maybe it was a big struggle, and they followed maybe there was reason to be lenient, and if, as long as there was a source, and they found this acceptable, this was permissible to do, and they would only eat the broken one. So that's how they did it. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, that it's preferred to use a matzah shmura during
Yeah, for
Pesach.
sure.
When do you eat the regular matzah? When can you eat the regular matzah?
Well, people who are careful, extra careful, they only eat shmura matzah the entire Pesach,
Including all the guests.
including all the guests. We don't even own regular matzah.
I see.
But I can't say that it's wrong to have regular matzah. Some
But
people
the
don't
stores
like.
are full with regular matzah. Somebody.
What is that?
The stores are, they're
Selling it.
truckloads of
Listen,
who's eating it?
it all boils down to priority. Some people would rather spend, $5,000 on their vacation. Other people would say, no, I'd rather have a beautiful Pesach and a beautiful lulav and esrog and a beautiful this, and I'm going to spend my little extra. I'll have a smaller vacation, but I'll spend money on the mitzvah and have 100% special Pesach and a nice lulav and esrog, and so it's priorities. People decide what they want. Do you want to go? It's
But in the store they have very little matzah shmura, but they have truckloads of the regular matzah.
They only have very little matzah shmura because a lot of the people take their vacations and they go to Switzerland, and they only buy the cheap matzah. But if they would buy the expensive, the shmura matzah, the store would have a lot more. And there would be, it's only because of demand. It boils down to how much people want to buy. But there are sometimes shortages. I can't say that that's totally true, what I just said. There are some shortages. They have enough matzah bakeries in the world to supply the amount of matzah. But in addition to that, the fact that there sometimes could be shortages, there definitely is an issue of demand. The people really want to spend the money on matzah and have the shmura matzah whole Pesach, or would they rather go to Switzerland for their vacation and spend thousands of dollars on their flights and on their hotels and on their skiing and so on? Maybe they could just go to Colorado and have a little cheaper, But whatever, that's.
A lot of people go away for Pesach too, but that's something else.
Right. Anyway, it boils down to priorities. Yeah, you got to know what your priorities are. But a lot of people don't like to use the machine matzahs because there were always questions about the machine being cleaned well. Are they 100% cleaned? Can the cleaning process get into every small tiny area? At the matzah bakery, they bake the matzah. They use a different tablecloth. The entire, everything is cleaned, and there are people watching every little part of it. But in the machinery, when you use a machine matzah, it's not, it's not easy to necessarily is every little particle getting cleaned out. So that's one issue with the machine matzah. There is additional issue with the machine matzah. Is it called? What?
Within the 18 minutes.
Well, I don't think the issue is within the 18 minutes. It's
the 18 minutes. That's why it's a shiloh.
Well, if it's not cleaned out the first 18 minutes, it's not going to be cleaned out the second. It's wherever their liquid that they clean the machine out goes to. So I don't think it's an 18-minute issue. It's an issue of it's never, certain areas probably don't, it's possible that it's so many little pieces in that machinery that there could be chametz that grows. And then the other issue with machine matzah is that it's not necessarily considered lishma. Are they baking it l'shem matzah mitzvah, for the mitzvah of eating matzah on the night of Pesach? that matzah has to be eaten, it has to be made with the intention that they're going to be fulfilling a mitzvah with it. It's not just for crackers, but it's for the mitzvah of matzah. That matzah has to be done with that intent. And so these are reasons why some people don't like to use the machine. They like to use the handmade. On the other hand, the handmade has its own problems. The handmade, some people don't like the handmade. I mean, we only use handmade, but I'll just tell you, I'll be honest with you. There are some that complain and say the handmade. You think that these ladies who roll the dough, they have there's no dough in their fingernails, there's no dough left, that they wash it so well every time after every 18 minutes. So some people say maybe the machine is better.
Kills everything.
What kills everything?
The baking process.
But they don't put their fingernails in the oven.
No, I mean whatever is left on the matzah.
If I could,
But I wanted to say, how do you do matzah brai with a matzah shmura? I mean, it's so dry, it doesn't.
All I can tell you is try it out during the year so that on Pesach, you won't mess up in front of your guests.
Well, I usually try
Rabbi,
it
if I
during
could,
the year with regular matzah, not with matzah shmura.
Right. Yes,
Rabbi, if I
Simone.
could,
Yeah.
So two things. So I'm just going to separate them out. In terms of the machine matzah, when the machine matzahs first came out, actually they were considered more kosher than the handmade matzahs because machinery was considered as more controllable. Human beings have their, you forget to watch it the time, or you messed up, or machinery is very precise. So it was considered actually initially more kosher. But what happened was that the women, it was generally women that were making the handmade matzahs, were losing their jobs. And that was a factor that went into the idea, which is that you don't take parnasa away from somebody. So that changed the dynamics of the decision in terms, that was part of, not everything, but part of what went into that formula. But to go back to your earlier question, I just wanted to give another example. So when you have a new fruit in the season, first you say shachianu, and then you say the bracha on the fruit. So there, again, you've got that where you've got the sort of two of them together on the one object.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's there. You're not doing even one. It's not even one mitzvah really. It's all about berachas hanen, and so I don't know if it's a perfect example. In other words, with Kiddush, at least it's about making Kiddush on Shabbos, matzah, you're doing the mitzvah of matzah. Here you're talking about eating food and that the food requires two brachas. It's not exactly the same. But and regarding the shmura matzah that you mentioned, you're adding another point to the equation.
Argument.
Yeah, but which is interesting about giving parnasa, but I wonder if that's mentioned in because there were great rabbis that debated this. This was a huge debate, and one of the major parts of the debate was the lishma. Is it considered l'shem mitzvahs matzah when they bake the matzah? They say when they roll the dough, they're saying constantly, this is in order for the mitzvah. This is in order for the mitzvah of matzah. They constantly say that. Now, when you flip the switch and the machine starts doing it, is that flipping the switch enough that you say l'shem mitzvahs matzah and you flip the switch? Is that good enough? Because the flipping the switch is really it's indirectly causing the pouring of the dough, pouring of the flour into the water, the flour and then the water, and then the kneading, and then that's causing the next thing. Like, it's so indirect. Is that your intention good enough if the machine is making it, but you did flip the switch? So is it too far removed for it to be considered your intention? Is it considered the machine's intention, and then that's not good enough? Or is it good, or is it good enough that even though because since you flipped the switch and you had in mind for the mitzvah, and you say for the mitzvah of matzah, does that, and that's really one of I'm talking about a huge amount of ink is spilled on this. This is not a small little discussion. And when they came out, it was a tremendous a tremendous discussion, debate among great rabbis. Yes, Ezra.
So you are basically saying that when the women who are actually doing it, they said it from the beginning when they started mixing and everything else, or did they say L'Shem Mitzvah at the time that they put it in the oven? Because I can claim the same thing for the machine matzah, because I can also say that somebody's standing there at the oven and saying L'Shem Mitzvah, at that point, or I could say it at the beginning where the guy throws the switch. At either case, well, I'm still saying it's being done for the mitzvah.
Right. So that would work. It would work if you're actually doing putting the matzah in the oven and you're saying it. You're kneading the dough and saying it. But if you're standing there and saying it and the machine is kneading the dough, then it's not being done l'shem mitzvahs matzah unless you're physically kneading it. If you're physically
Rabbi, if you have that in mind, why isn't that good enough?
Because just because there's 1,000 people standing there and that doesn't make it being done for the mitzvah. It has to be the act. The act is done for the mitzvah, not that you're standing there having in mind and because you're within 3 feet. It has an effect on the area that's around you. It's not like perfume. If it was perfume, it would work. It affects 3 feet around you, but it has to be, the act has to be done for the mitzvah. And so flipping on the switch is questionable. And again, it's debated by big rabbis. Obviously some rabbis accepted it and I would never tell someone off if they use a machine shmura matzah. But there are different traditions, and I know people who only like to use machine from the different ways of different people have different ways of thinking. Okay, so oh boy, my time is up.